It's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello, so the FPL an object fading in our rearview mirror. We're taking a different tack this week in the first of a new series, striking a new direction in this strange time. Yes, the genesis of our WGTA in Lockdown series, which as you'll hear shortly, means a short-term diversion away from FPL and into pastures adjacent, yet new. I'm joined by Stag and Nick, of course, today. Nick, you alright?
Hey mate, yep, I'm all right, thank you. Just enjoying life in the lockdown, missing the football so much, obviously as well. But everything's fine. Just getting on with things as you can in this scenario. But yeah, just to remind everyone who we are. We are Who Got the Assist. Twitter is at WGTA_FPL for Tom, at WGTA_Nick for me, and Stag can be found at FPL Stag. We're also on Instagram, WGTA.FPL. So what's on the pod this week, Anthony?
So yeah, as we pivot away from FPL, as Tom was saying, what we're going to do first of all is just look at the world of football for just a second. There's been quite a lot happening with regards to the furloughing of non-playing staff at clubs, players taking pay cuts, etc. So we're going to have a quick look at that and some other football news, such as a change of management at the Republic of Ireland international team, which is obviously important to me and some people who are listening. And then we're going to move on to the pièce de résistance of this series, where we're going to look at the new Sunderland Til series, focusing on episode 1 and looking through the episode to try and understand the greater context of the episode and what goes on in our views on it.
Oh, excellent. Just to say as well before we start, as I've been saying the whole time we've been stuck indoors, this pod's not going to speculate on COVID. Shout out to the key workers, you guys doing an absolutely heroic job. And we hope this podcast has taken the spirit in which it is made, which is simply to hopefully make a small positive difference for you all and keep us sane. Right, let's move into the news then. Let's first thing, I guess, talk about is furloughing. I mean, just before we came on air, a couple of things have come out, haven't they? Nick, you just shared a link in our little group, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. So originally, Liverpool was saying that they were going to be furloughing their staff, and came under a lot of criticism off the back of that. Obviously, as a massive club, one of the biggest in the world, to be sort of looking to the government for handouts came across very, very badly amongst their core base, saying, the club can afford to pay these workers. Why do they need to furlough their staff? So since then, they have actually announced a U-turn. They've reversed that decision. They've listened to the sort of the public in terms of their opinions and, U-turn that decision. And obviously, I think we'd all agree that that was the right decision to make, to do that U-turn. But a few other clubs currently still furloughing their staffs, including Spurs, who I'm obviously a supporter of. Not great from my standpoint. I think the club should seriously look about whether this is the right decision to make, but we all kind of know the character Daniel Levy is. But I think a lot of the fan base at the moment are screaming out to him to reverse that decision as well, but just because of the way it looks for the club. They are another massive club. I know they're recently in debt because of the new stadium, but they are a massive, massive club, and they don't necessarily need to be making this decision.
See, I actually think that this hatred, vilification maybe, of the decision that Liverpool's owners have taken with the furloughing initially, obviously now they've rode back on that, but I think that the disappointment of that belies a misunderstanding of what furloughing actually is and how it's funded most specifically. Like, this isn't stealing taxpayers' money. This is just the Bank of England just adding money to the Exchequer's accounts. So it's not the way people are trying to paint it. Like, the way it's being painted, it's as if the owners of Liverpool are putting their hands into a nurse's back pocket and using it to pay the last 20% of someone's earnings and leaving the government to fork up the rest of it. Like, the fact of the matter is that the state are going to pay 80% of the wages of people up to £2,500 pounds per month, and then Liverpool were quite happy to pay the other 20% initially. Like, okay, people are saying Liverpool just announced profits. Yeah, but like, we're not talking like hundreds of millions of pounds or anything like it. So like that's a vulnerable thing still, even for a club the size of Liverpool. They need to protect their long-term sustainability. If there's if they have a serious cash crunch, they're going to need to sell players. They need to do what they can to protect people's jobs in the much longer term. They need to avoid, let's say, the drop in quality that would lead to other costs on the club, like needing to make more transfers, sackings, even layoffs of non-playing staff. And there's just the big unknown element of this. How long is this going to go on? How long is Liverpool going to have to continue without revenue? And actually, Peter Moore even addressed this in his letter to fans when he was rowing back the decision. And just to give a full reading, in the spirit of transparency, we must also be clear that despite the fact that we were in a healthy position prior to this crisis, our revenues have been shut off, yet our outgoings remain. And, like almost every sector of society, there is great uncertainty and concern over our present and future. Like any responsible employer concerned for its workers in the current situation, the club continues to prepare for a range of different scenarios around when football can return to operating as it did before the pandemic. These scenarios range from best case to worst and everything in between. It is an unavoidable truth that several of these scenarios involve a massive downturn in revenue with correspondingly unprecedented operating losses. Having these vital financial resources so profoundly impacted would have obviously negatively affect our ability to operate as we previously have. What is the issue with Liverpool furloughing?
I think for me, I think the main thing to highlight is the non-playing staff. So it's not really about the playing staff. It's about the non-playing staff basically telling all these people that they're not going to be working. Obviously, they know they're not going to be working, but the whole scheme essentially it was summed up quite well actually. If you read the Sean Ingle article in the Guardian, where he said about saving just £1 million when you have an annual wage bill of £310 million and you paid 43 million to agents last year, is not a good look. And I think that's the concern here, especially with Spurs as well. They instantly furloughed all their non-playing staffs, but no news at all about any of the playing staff who are all still earning £200,000 a week for the highest earners within the team, and £30,000 a week for some of the other players. That's the concern there.
I think you basically hit the nail on the head there, Nick. It's not a good look. I think I definitely have a lot of sympathy for what Anthony's saying there. The scheme is basically being thought of as redundancy, isn't it? People are equating the two in their heads. So they're saying Liverpool are furloughing their staff. So people pass that as being Liverpool are making their non-playing staff redundant. That's not true, obviously. But this is optics in a bad time. And unfortunately, nuance isn't the friend of a scared and irrational public. I think the scheme was designed to stop SMEs from going under. So to some extent, that's the worry, that a lot of people are looking at it and kind of thinking, you know what, the detail means that you're right, Stag, but it's fundamentally not the best look. I mean, Newcastle and Spurs, Spurs and Levy, Newcastle and Mike Ashley, you can believe it. You can believe they're going for the furlough option or, trying to make savings however they can. But Liverpool, WTAF, basically. I think the perceptual damage, so we're talking about the abstract, the fluffy brand kind of stuff here, was really tangible. And that's why they made the decision. Credit to them for changing their minds, by the way. A lot of clubs won't do that in the modern age. A lot of people won't admit, in effect, they're wrong. That's what the statement to me basically said in kind of convoluted business language. We were wrong.
But look, Liverpool have talked about this in the past about channeling Bill Shankly into their business decision making, and that his socialist ethos is something that they consider with every decision they make. And would I say that they considered that with this decision initially? No, of course not. But it's this kind of abject just vitriol against furloughing, which is really protecting staff, and Liverpool trying to make sure that when football eventually returns, they can take back on their staff again. Just think of the numbers, for example, that have come out from Manchester United's decision not to furlough. Okay, so they're paying 100% of the wages of 900 full-time non-paying staff. They're also paying the full salaries or payments that 950 other non-match day casual workers would get, plus another 3,000 casual match day workers. A huge amount of employees, a huge amount of people that they're trying to protect the incomes of into the future at Liverpool.
No, again, I see why they're doing it, and I completely kind of see your point in terms of looking into the detail of what it all means. It's just at the moment, in terms of the brand, which is ultimately paramount, because that's where the market strength comes from. That's why they made the decision. Whether I agree with it, I probably would have thought about it more in the first place, in terms of what you said about Shankly, for example, and that sort of spirit of socialist hoi polloi. I just don't think that should have been done. I think that was a very kind of ultimately naive decision to go for it, because they should have thought about how that would have been portrayed and how that would have come out. And ultimately, even though in a rational way, yes, of course, it makes sense for them to do it, I think that probably they are going to have a little bit of damage now. But with doing the U-turn, I think that they probably made that a little bit better.
like, okay, so from that branding point of view, like, it's unequivocal. Of course, Liverpool shouldn't have made the decision they made in the first place. And as you say, credit for them for running back on it, because it just didn't go with the ethos that they had. But at the same time, you can't say that, let's say, other Premier League clubs, and especially other Football League clubs at far lower levels, are going to need this. Like, there's so many of them are screaming out that they're going to go under at the lower leagues, especially if they weren't able to take schemes like this furlough scheme. But at the end of the day, I think if you have a grievance with Liverpool being able or deciding to take on or to use that scheme in the first place, then really what you have an issue with is how the UK government actually phrased this furloughing scheme in a legal sense and who they allowed to take it. But it's not actually really taking money directly from the fight against COVID. This isn't Liverpool reaching into a doctor's back pocket, and I just feel that has been seriously misunderstood in the middle of all this.
You wouldn't be suggesting that people are having to go at Liverpool for other reasons or having other agendas with you, Stag. That would be absolutely unthinkable, wouldn't it?
Dear no, nobody does that. No.
Anyway, should we move on from this bit? The next bit is obviously the indefinite postponement of the season. And FIFA also earlier on today said that the 1920 season is basically extended to whenever they want, so it's got to be played out. It seems like I think it's like 90% we're sure that the season is going to be concluded in some way, shape or form. Although an interesting character did weigh in, didn't he, Nick, today on the length of the season?
Well, yeah, we've had Karen Brady. We also had Harry Kane, and now we've had Luke Shaw. Luke Shaw's stepped up and given us his opinion on what should happen. He said the season should be voided. So thanks, Luke. Informative as always. Great expert advice there from Luke Shaw, saying the season's going to be null and void.
An interesting story has come from over here in Belgium, where I am based at the moment. And so last Thursday, the Belgian Pro League recommended, so they hadn't decided, but they recommended that their season would be declared finished because of the pandemic, and to just accept the table as it was as final. Now, they only had one match day left in their regular season. It's a different structure of a league to what you have in the Premier League. But just to know, UEFA came out strongly against that on Friday, issuing a joint statement with the European Club Association, the European leagues, warning that abandoning domestic competitions at this stage is premature and not justified. So for sure, right now, the consensus is to try and save the seasons across Europe.
Yeah, cool. And speaking of people coming in to save stricken areas, Mr. Kenny was appointed as the Ireland head coach manager. I don't know what the style is over there at the moment, replacing Mick McCarthy. And this is something that you wanted to talk about at Lempstag. Is he going to turn those 1-1s and 1-0s into 1-1s and 2-1s? What's he going to do?
Or maybe even 4-0 losses, but it's going to be a bit more interesting at least. So Stephen Kenny, a name that many of you probably won't know, has been appointed as our manager, and Damien Duff, a name who many of you will know, is his assistant manager. So I think you need to understand where Irish football is coming from to kind of get to this. So in Euro 2016, we just about qualified, and we took the oldest squad at that tournament to the tournament. And I guess, look, we did get out of the groups, and that was miraculous in its own way. But the team that at the time Martin O'Neill and Roy Keane were presiding over was definitely on its last legs, and so it proved in the Nations League, where we were drubbed continuously by Wales and Denmark, coming last in our group and stuff. Mick McCarthy took over, and sure, okay, he returned smiles, and he was clearly a good guy that the manager or that the players got on well with. But look, this was a man who played a brand of football that perhaps was kind of maybe belongs in the past at this point, and the results were pretty much we beat Gibraltar reliably, just about. We didn't beat Georgia in 2 games. There were no unbelievable results under Stephen Kenny, and so the reason why Mick was brought in initially was to basically qualify Ireland for the Euros in 2020, because games were to be hosted in Dublin, and it would have been a major embarrassment for us to not qualify. And also because the FAI, as it wasn't known at the time but has been known since, was financially crippled. So the problem is that whilst we watch this really awful football being played, long balls, no ambition, the lot, we had this horrendous contrast when we looked up north to what Michael O'Neill was managing to do with even more limited resources with a Northern Ireland team that had, the likes of Johnny Evans and Kyle Lafferty and Stuart Dallas from Leeds, just ripping it up and genuinely attacking really good teams. I even watched them playing against Germany, and they really had a go. Whereas we had this long-term problem that we've had since Trapattoni in the 2000s, talking about not having the players. We do not have the tribune, is what Trapattoni used to say. Martin O'Neill comes in and he's like, oh, well, if we had a young Robbie Keane, it'd be so much better. But like, yeah, of course, it would have been great to have a young Robbie Keane, a 100 Premier League goal striker, but we don't have this Robbie Keane. And so it's just like, it was so frustrating to deal with. And Mick kind of he didn't quite say things as directly as we don't have the players, but it was much more so an acceptance that we can't beat Georgia away, which was just as heartbreaking, I guess, especially because you know well that Northern Ireland would have beaten Georgia away and at home comfortably. So Stephen Kenny comes in then. Who is Stephen Kenny? He is the man that was the manager of Dundalk when they qualified for the Europa League group stages a few years ago, pushing the likes of Zenit St. Petersburg, beating one of the Israeli teams along the way, taking out all sorts of like strong European teams, like playing though, and really interesting brand of football. He is obsessed with controlling the midfield, about possession. He's so open-minded to trying to get defenders to pass, to have players that attack. And most of all, what he tries to institute is a system. And like that has even been seen in his most recent job, which has been as Ireland 21's manager for the last 2 years. I've been at a few of their games. I've watched even more of them. And what he's able to do is bring in a system that gets the best out of a whole squad, but where if you lose 2 players to injury, it seems like he's just able to manage to get the same out of the players that come in. And like, we're not a nation that's usually blessed with pools of talent. And yet this is a man who could, Michael Obafemi gets injured. Oh, it's okay. Aaron Connolly will come in and he'll get the same out of him. But not okay. They're both Premier League players, but he was able to do the same thing with left backs none of us have ever heard of. And that's what was most impressive about Stephen Kenny and how he manages his team. And he's just so positive about things. And it's exciting, guys. It's exciting.
You definitely sound very enthusiastic and excited about him coming in. I guess, as you said, the renewal of the squad, and I guess given the dearth of talent that you guys have, to be honest, compared to a lot of other countries, I suppose the impetus for him is going to be to make this team more than some of its parts, perhaps. I guess it would be fair to say if you're looking at it a bit more objectively.
Absolutely, but that's what almost every international manager has to do. It's there's only a few tier 1 nations like the likes of England, Spain, Italy. Even Italy haven't been a tier 1 nation necessarily lately. But Ireland's 21 team, like there is actually talent coming through. There's plenty of guys playing at the the top division in England or getting regular game time in the Championship already. It's not just almost meme status already Troy Parrott, who's 18 and barely played for anybody, yet we all talk about him. But there's the likes of Aaron Connolly, the Adam Edas, who's at Norwich. There's Gavin Kilkenny playing at Bournemouth. Danny Muldreu, who was at Bohemians last season, is doing well. Jason Knight at Derby County has done so well. And Conor Ronan as well. He was a player who was out on loan in Slovakia and doing really well out there. It's just like there's such a different mental approach to the game of football with this team and their ambition. I saw them playing Italy off the park in Dublin at a 21s game, and this was an Italian team that had players that we've all heard of. Patrick Crotone played, Moise Keane played. There was plenty of other players there who were playing Serie A.
Zaniolo.
Was Nick Zaniolo there? I don't think Zaniolo was there, but there were plenty of...
Oh, if he was there, you'd lost.
Yeah, possibly, but plenty of unbelievably good players to a Serie A quality. And played them off the park.
Cool. Well, it sounds like an exciting time for Ireland. Watch out, Northern Ireland, I guess.
Euro 2021.
Indeed. Right. Okay. So let's move that on there then to WGTA in lockdown, featuring for the first few pods Sunderland Till I Die. We're going to start with Series 2. First thing to talk about is why we're doing this. So obviously there's no FPL, and it's time to just put front with you guys that we're now openly just podcasting for our own amusement and to stop us going insane. Basically is what I said at the top of the pod. Obviously we do want you to listen, hope we entertain you, but obviously our main subject matter doesn't exist at the moment. So at the moment we've got a choice. Basically we can kind of keep talking about what we've been talking about, do a mailbag and things like that, or we can try to do something else, come up with something a little bit more novel, a bit more interesting. With Sunderland Til I Die, we're hoping that if we kind of go through kind of each episode and talk about some of the key salient points, hopefully that would be a little bit insightful, a little bit interesting. Obviously, we'll be back to FPL as soon as possible, though. But over the next 6 weeks, we're going to go episode by episode, summing up our thoughts, and we're kind of narrating the episode to some extent in the style of kind of the Great Generation podcast and stuff like that, before diving into some key points at relevant times. So loads of sound bites and stuff. I'll be doing some magical editing
It's a different approach we're taking. It's not our usual FPL podcast, but we fancy doing something slightly different. We're all watching Sunderland Till I Die, as I said in the intro. We're all missing the football, and we can watch the football as we follow the series. I think both me and Tom have only seen the first episode so far, so it's very much a fresh take for us. I think Stag has seen a few more of the episodes. We've all watched season 1 as well, so we'll be recapping a little bit on what happened on season 1. I think before we crack on.
Cool, right, let's take a break there and we'll pick up at the start of Season 2, Episode 1, A Role in the Renaissance.
Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Okay, so we're back, and it's a 43-minute episode, the first episode in Series 2 of Sunderland Till I Die, A Role in the Renaissance. Obviously, it starts with a last season, and Anthony, can you fill in for how it started?
Last season, it was a season in the championship. What was meant to be a positive promotion story ended up actually being a dramatic relegation story, which we were all on tenterhooks really watching, and was brilliant. It was a threadbare squad. There were cutbacks. We got to see the human impact on players and on the fans themselves. We saw Jason Steele go from optimistic goalkeeper to shadow of himself in no time. We saw local boy George Honeyman close to tears at relegation when it all went so wrong at the end, as their season went from bad to worse. Their home form was terrible. The fans turned against them for periods. And then we also had star of the show, Martin Bain, the chief executive, who at first was introduced to us in that season, having his morning swim. But by the end, we saw him leave to a crescendo of booze and cursing and the fans. But yet, the fans turned up for the final game at Sunderland in their droves, like a mother that always loves her kids. And it was stunning that, you kind of saw this club that there was so much soul there. And so then it ended with the new crowd coming in and this club being sold, and hope yet again abound as Sunderland started in League One.
Yeah, I felt like that end of the season 1 was just absolutely gut-wrenching when you saw them all sort of down the pub, like crying, singing sort of Take My Heart, Take My Whole Life Too, and just everyone just being absolutely devastated. I just remember like the emotional impact really hit me, and I wasn't even a Sunderland fan. And, you saw, as you said, Martin Bain leaving, being sworn at, Chris Coleman saying, I've got 5 kids, mate, and getting in a fight with that fan that was abusing him. It was quite a dramatic ending to it all. And as you said, it started with so much positivity, even though we all kind of knew what was going to happen. We all had it kind of gut-wrenching feeling in our stomachs as we watched along.
Yeah, I think the whole thing commoditized Schadenfreude in watchable content, didn't it? But yeah, the Series 2 starts with Ellis Short selling to a consortium fronted by Stuart Donald, obviously, and a little interview with them at a press conference. Stuart Donald and his sidekick, Charlie Metven, who memorably says, "The piss take party stops now." And the series opens indeed with Charlie telling, who we presume is his marketing team, saying how £40 million was being lost per year. He said, "This is a failed up business. This was 100%. We'll discuss this guy a little bit later on in the pod." But it turns out in the meeting as well, but no one had read the detail of the dire straits of the club. He exhorts his team to be part of the team that turned around Sunderland Football Club.
Do something memorable in your career that you look back on in 20 years' time and you say, I was part of the team that turned that club around.
And this is kind of the Peter Griffin, he said it moment as he name checks them having a role in the Renaissance.
He does, but what I think is so interesting about this is that, a lot of the time there might be takeovers or business leaders kind of come in and they'll talk about the need for cultural change, that people need to, own their work or whatever. But I think you see that, like, there actually is a need for them to maybe, own it a little bit more, that nobody knew that the club's interest payments of £7 million per year were equal to their whole entire ticket revenue for the season. Like, it was so stunning. Like, that's the people who are selling the club to the fans, and they didn't know that basic point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we can build that into discussion on Charlie in a little bit. But it definitely is true that what the club was like is, I think, clear from that sort of little insight. In they literally had no idea, did they? Hadn't bothered to read the little pat that he put together for them.
But they said, like, they didn't know that, whilst at the same time they totally knew what Charlie was trying to get across, that like your job actually has so much meaning, because this is, the temple of the city, the Stadium of Light. People come here no matter what. This is the God they worship. And yet somehow they still hadn't kind of connected those two details. I thought it was amazing.
Absolutely not. So with that, there's rousing music, scenes of Sunderland, as Barry Glendinning calls them, and opening music on the river way. Yeah, you know how it goes.
On the river where they used to build the boats.
Anyway, so at this point, we've got a juncture. A question from our friend Death Star FPL. During the opening credits, can you rate the opening title song alongside other preferred favourite opening songs? He goes on to say he imagines Anthony is more of a Friends fan. But what's our opening TV tunes, and what do we think of the opening to a Sunderland Till I Die?
Yeah, I actually really like the theme music. Yeah, as I said, it does kind of create this emotional resonance with the city. Builds a connection between yourself and the city, even if you're not from that area. And you know, it kind of gives you. I think like with the start of the first season, when you first heard the music for the first time, they were talking about the religious aspect of Sunderland and how, you know, even in the church sermons they talk about the football club and they all pray for the football club, and then you kind of get introduced to this intro music and they talk about, you know, the port town, and it was kind of like the imagery in the background is all kind of about the industrial sort of town and the football and how it all connects within each other. In terms of my favourite TV tune, I don't know. I quite like if you've ever watched True Detective, I think that's got a really good soundtrack to it. I'm also a big fan of the music within The Wire, both The Wire and the True Detective. I think they're actually somewhat the same guy, but yeah, that's kind of my sort of scene in terms of TV show intros. I don't know about you, Anthony. Are you more of a fan of I'll Be There For You?
I'm not a big Friends fan, but like I have thought about theme tunes that I like, and I was thinking back at like childhood time, Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh's ones. Like they really fit in the madness and the mold of the program that's there. You know, it's just pure color and imagery and sound, and I think that the theme tunes get that across. Now, Tom, hear me out, man. But then think about then Father Ted. It also kind of captures the essence of like you're kind of going backward in time into this funny but tragic, simpler past, and then you've got something very different like what happens with Match of the Day. There's joy, hope, the associations. Everyone understands it. In Ireland, it's the same with the Sunday Game, which introduces GAA programs at home. Like it's a thing that unifies the community. But for me, the song, which is called Shipyards by the Lake Poets, who rather unfittingly is actually just the name of a man called Marty Longstaff, obviously a Newcastle name to all of us. But I think Death Star's description of it as a funeral march kind of nails it. Like the song is harking back to Sunderland's industrial past, sure, and it's talking about trying to make those who have gone by proud. But okay, it works because Sunderland's story has been very sad of late as a club, but I don't think it fits the really vivacious, ebullient reality of that club, like what it thinks it is, what it wants to be, and what its fans somehow still are, for me.
It's almost like it's knowing, isn't it? It kind of, as we said, it always introduces itself full of hope, and as that hope sort of dissipates through the season, like it goes from being kind of quite funereal to really fitting what you expect from the episode's content as things do go downhill. I mean, I don't know how it's going to go in series 2, but in series 1, like at the start, it did seem a little bit like it jarred, but then towards the end of the season, when things were really going downhill very fast, it really began to fit the show. Like almost the show grew into it due to the fact that the content happened, even though the content was so kind of unplanned and spontaneous. Obviously, it seemed like an incredible choice, really.
Well, maybe for season 3, that might be another thing that Charlie Methven looks to change as they try and create a new image for Sunderland, perhaps.
Yeah, no, indeed. All right, and my favourite entry to any show is Hollow Talk, Choir of the Young Believers, which is the opening of The Bridge, which is a similarly sort of sombre, funereal start to a show, but obviously that's a Scandi noir, so it's absolutely perfect for that. Anyway, though, back to the show, and we open in June 2018. We're in Stuart Donald's bathroom, and he's talking about the vitality of promotion, how important it is. And he does this kind of hearty, kind of fan service bit to the camera. He's blown away by Sunderland, etc., etc. And I think he did seem kind of fairly genuine and articulate. I mean, he did use a lot of cliches, and notably he doesn't have a Sunderland accent, but you know, that seems by the by. But then you kind of hear this bit over the radio, don't you, about who he is and where he's come from, and that seemed to be a little bit instructive.
Who is Stuart Donald?
Businessman from Oxford. He runs an insurance company, but he also has a 10% stake in Oxford United, who play in League One, which is the division that Sunderland will be playing in.
So that felt a bit breezed over almost, didn't it? As if they kind of said, you better not talk about this. It's a bit of a red line. I think that's a bit of a moment for discussion, isn't it? Because club ownership, Stuart Donald, as you heard, 10% of Oxford United, and he sold Eastleigh to now himself ownership. He's basically a serial owner, isn't he? What do we think about this?
It's a very kind of pejorative way almost to look at it if you want to call him a serial owner, because you could also just say he has a proven track record and look at it from the other perspective. Like the Chronicle, which is a paper up there in the Northeast, looked at fan reactions at Eastleigh at the sale of when he sold it to take over Sunderland, and many of them were gutted, heartbroken. They were wishing him the best. Others would have said he overpaid for players. It kind of sounds a bit like what happened with Salford when they were in the lower divisions, that they couldn't get anybody cheap. And they also would have criticized him for being a bit too impatient with his managers. But like the Guardian reported that he put £10 million into Eastleigh over 5 years to take them from one of those conference regional divisions right through to the conference. So they went up one division for £10 million. And for me, like, I think Stuart, like, okay, he's laden with cliches, sure, but he's clearly trying. He's trying to be transparent. He's putting his effort in and trying to open himself up. And I think all the credit for him at that point.
Far be it from me to correct your pronunciation, but I'm going to relish this. It's Eastleigh, not Eastleigh. Eastleigh. Got one in. Sorry, Nick, go ahead.
I think the whole criticism of him being a serial owner perhaps is a little bit unfair. As Stag said, what he did at Eastleigh was very impressive in terms of bringing them up the divisions. And then looking at Sunderland, obviously Sunderland is a much, much bigger club. And, you know, you'd say I wouldn't really call it being a serial owner. When you look at managers, you don't call them being a serial manager if they show some ambition and move from a League One club to a Premier League club. And you certainly wouldn't say the same about players when they move around at their sort of, obviously, likes of Zlatan might kiss the badge of many, many different clubs, but on the whole, you don't kind of chastise players for wanting to move places. So I think personally, it's okay for him to have gone from Eastleigh. The 10% of ownership of Oxford seems a bit dodgy, especially considering they're in the same league as Sunderland. And definitely seems like some form of conflict of interest there. But we'll see if anything over the course of the series builds from that.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of why that was breezed over, especially because that was a really pertinent point. I mean, this guy owns 10% of a division rival. That seems a little bit kind of bizarre to me. I guess it was just to help the story flow. Maybe it was convenient for them to just pay lip service and move on. I mean, on ownership, I did have a little look, and obviously you've got examples of owners owning clubs in different countries. Evangelos Marinakis, who owns Forest and Olympiacos, for example. The City Group obviously own lots. But in England, you seem to be able to do something a little bit different, which is to do what Stuart Donald does or did, or I don't even know. I think he still does have both those stakes, and that you can own a little bit of two clubs. In England, and owning a 30% or more is defined as being controlling, whereas under UEFA rules, you can actually own 100% of one club and 49% of another, because they define controlling as being 51% of a club. So that allows a loophole at the moment where you can say, okay, I'm actually not a controlling stakeholder, so I can have fingers in multiple pies effectively. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about, the furloughing almost, because it's just not a good look, is it? And I think that maybe that's why they sort of breezed over it, because getting into it would have been a whole kind of sub chat in itself, which is perfect for something like this. But maybe for the show, it would have arrested the momentum of the narrative, which is why they didn't really go into it. But I don't know. I think for a lot of people, I think there was a Hornet FPL spoke to me earlier on today when I said we were going to do this, and he said that like that, but didn't really sit right with him. And it's just something that I picked up on the second time watching, taking notes of this, and I thought, WTF, I can't believe I've heard that.
Call me commercially naive, but why would it necessarily be that important? Like, it'd be one thing if he was a 10% owner of Oxford United, whilst at the same time somehow in some sort of CEO role at that club. But the fact of the matter is that, his pocket is really on the line at Sunderland, a club that he's taken over and put his own money into. Whereas Oxford United was his boyhood club, one that he's put a bit of money into. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be the sort of thing that's going to bring him untold riches. Like, at the end of the day, his bread is buttered in Sunderland, and 10% is a pretty inconsequential stake as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think I can see both arguments, to be honest. I kind of agree with you there in terms of what you said. Perhaps it's inconsequential that he's invested in his sort of previous club and he does have some form of ownership. I think it's just a very interesting to see how this develops, and particularly if they do show some clips of Sunderland playing Oxford, whether that topic will be addressed again later on in the series.
Cool. All right. Anything else on that bit? Move on.
So I think the series moves on with sort of the radio interview as I was picked up in that radio interview, and then some more kind of chats with some of the fans, and then it kind of goes on to the sort of the axing of the bloated nature of some of the playing squad. So we see the likes of Endong, he's shifted. Stephen Fletcher and Sheffield United's Jack Rodwell, of course, finally being shifted. It was just absolutely ridiculous, that whole storyline in the first series, the amount of money that guy was costing the club. They had to get rid of him sharp, and they were able to move him on to Blackburn, luckily. And Aidan McGeady, he's still within the playing squad. I think a lot of us probably forgot him, that he was even a thing, to be honest. The glory days of his Everton appearance, and he was one of David Moyes' boys, brought from Everton to Sunderland alongside the likes of Donald Love and I think Paddy McNair as well.
God, I think he's at Charlton now, but he's still under contract at Sunderland. So your man McGeady must have been on a ridiculous contract with them. Stag, that seems amazing that McGeady's still under contract at Sunderland many years later. It's like he's been there forever, doesn't it?
Putting his body on the line and playing brilliantly for them, as kind of the series will play out, in fairness. Like he wasn't a member of that screen of pain that we saw with Endong, Fletcher, Guyan, Jermaine Lawn and Rodwell. Like, he's certainly not in that bracket, and you kind of, as the series develops, you'll see the effort he's putting in and that he really does care. And you also saw that in the previous series where he kind of talked about, I think it was Chris Coleman's methods, and kind of wasn't too approving of them, but you could see that, like, unlike some of the players there, he really did care about what was going on and understood the value of the club. So I don't know, I'll always stick up for the Republic of Ireland International, won't I?
Got that vibe from Lee Cattermole as well. He's another one of the players that sort of won these sort of bloated wage packets that they weren't able to shift. But he's another one that I felt like really did seem to care about the club. He just wasn't able to put in the performances that the fans wanted to see, unfortunately, whether that's because of skill or something else.
What about Darren Gibson though, Stack? I'm sure. Do you think he cared as much about the club?
He certainly talked the talk for a while. He's actually been doing quite well for Salford City this season. So best of luck to Gibbo in his new ventures.
Stay off the vino, mate. Right, and then we move into young, brilliant manager Jack Ross being appointed, and you see his kind of football manager, the game that is style opening press conference, and he says, it's better to be going down enough, and it's a great challenge for him, and he's hoping he can rise to the occasion. But how do you think he came across? He seemed like he's going to be a main guy in this series, isn't he?
I mean, it's early days. I felt like he said the right things in the press conference. Very much had a sort of football manager feel to it, didn't it? In terms of, he had about 5 options in terms of where he thinks they might finish at the end of the season. He's like, well, we're going to be going for promotion, and the fans reacted positively to that comment. And in terms of his manner, he's obviously sort of young, upcoming manager, not one that I personally had heard of before he moved to Sunderland. So I think it's a bold choice for sure.
I think he'd come in with having been a manager of the year, or young manager of the year in Scotland the previous season. So he might have been actually quite a good coup for them to get at the time. But no, the clichédness of the very football manager-esque press conference was hilarious almost. And my thing I enjoyed the most was actually seeing Charlie Methven kind of pressing himself up against the wall to the side, just watching it, and his face was just telling like 1,000 stories at the same time as he reacted, especially to that, as you call it, Nick, where Jack Ross just clicks the "we're going for promotion" button, and he kind of goes, "Oh God, he said it." That was great.
No, I think it's one of those moments, wasn't it? So I think he was at St Mirren, and he won, as you said, the young manager of the year, and he won the Scottish Championship that year and got them promoted. Sunderland and Ipswich were both actually gunning for Jack Ross's services, and it sounds like we'll see who got the best end of the deal, but Ipswich have ended up with Paul Lambert. Ooh, interesting one. But yeah, no, he seemed like a nice guy, and you see him kind of getting on with the footballers as they come and go, clapping them. What the hell is this called?
High-fiving kind of.
No, it wasn't really a high five
though. It's a real kind of like, it's an up high like
Deli Ali handshake
thing. Yeah.
It's like clasping hands with them as he goes through the physio room and goes, you well, and they'll go, yes boss, yeah. And then it cuts to our man Charlie Methven speaking to his marketing team, and I guess this is one of the biggest points of this week's podcast and this episode, because the overlay is Charlie saying he's a big picture man, he's a journalist, a marketeer, whereas Stuart is the details man. His role, he says, is to express things into plans, strategies and ideas. he starts a meeting with his marketing team. He's late, of course, and he sets out, as he says, that he wants them to be the number one for engagement, fan service, and other things like that. But there's a key moment here, which is the key moment for episode 1, which is the music change, which sounds very, very silly, very, very small. But they really did focus in on this and make this a big part of the episode, because I think it is emblematic of a new ownership, new era, new things like that. So the music changes from the dance of the nights, aka the apprentice music, to the sort of clubby trance.
So this is Dance the Nights, right? This is how I do it as a DJ, because you've got to try and build people up, and you've got to try and get the atmosphere building.
The scene becomes a bit like a parody, basically, at that point. The question here, then, was it genuinely clever, or was it just a shallow gesture?
So, I mean, when I was first watching this scene, I thought the whole thing was just came across a little bit ridiculous, a little bit parody-esque. I don't know. As you said, they chose to make it a big focus for episode 1. I'm not sure if that was sort of a decision based on sort of Charlie's and Stuart. I don't know how much control they actually have in terms of the content that is on the documentary. But I think in terms of a gesture, I couldn't get my head around it at first. I couldn't really understand why this was happening. What was the whole point of it? It seemed very pointless, and that was illustrated in later scenes as well. But then when Charlie kind of explained himself later on in the episode in the tunnel to kind of highlighted the fact that look, they've got this club has gone a whole year without winning a single game at this stadium, or at least nearly a year. That was just, to be honest, that is an absolutely shocking statistic, and he really kind of gave off this vibe of basically saying what he wants to do. He's big picture man, as he describes himself. He wants to turn Sunderland into a fortress. He wants to opposing teams to clump to Sunderland and be scared, wherever that's going to happen, with a bit of IB for EDM trance music. I'm not sure, but I can certainly understand that he's saying, look, I can't affect things, in terms of the players' performances, but I can change the stadium. That is what I have control over. I can make an intimidating place for people to come to. He wants people to come to Sunderland and be scared of playing this team like they were going to Old Trafford in the 90s and 00s. That's his grand picture. That's what he's going for here. And like, his approach is not really one that I would personally follow if I was in charge of the company. It did come across as I think we're going to mention later, a little bit David Brent-esque, but I can understand what he's trying to achieve with this.
So I think I'm going to come in with a Methven-esque one-liner here, but the fact of the matter is that he recognises that if Sunderland were competing on The Apprentice, they would have been fired so many times. So they just had to break with the past on this. And so look, okay, people, like even the people who were in there with him in the meeting, they were, one of the guys points out that the music that they had was slow, it was boring, it wasn't motivating anybody. And as you say, Nick, he's creating a fortress here. So I like that. Now, what I think is quite interesting, though, is that he plays the music and then he goes, someone challenged me on this idea. And, one of the ladies points out how, well, it's the song we've had for years and it's been here since the stadium opened. And, for people of a certain generation, it ties us back. And what I love, though, is he asked, someone challenged me here. It was the same EDM track. They didn't even change EDM track as it comes to it. You see them walking out on the first day of the season to the same thing. So at the end of the day, Methven's way or the highway.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely true. I think he'd made his decision, and that he was basically just going to legitimate it through some sort of pseudo democracy. But as anybody who's ever worked in the business under one entrepreneur knows, it's not a democracy; it's a dictatorship. A benevolent one, but it's a dictatorship. But yeah, it felt like a statement sacking almost to me. Like it was a demarcation of a new era, and every manager does kind of, I guess in football terms, every manager does scapegoat a player or has been known to assert his authority, be it behind closed doors most of the case, or if you're someone like Jose Mourinho throwing a player under the bus like Ndombele. I was actually once the designated statement sacking myself for a CEO to assert authority at a past job. Yeah, when I was my first ever job, I was a young upstart who dared answer her back that I thought that she told me to do something. I said, no, I don't think that's actually the right thing to do. Turned out I was right, but she tried to sack me over it. I had to write a grovelling apology I didn't really mean, and then soon left. But but I think it does seem to be something that's done, that people do want to make one statement which is kind of cosmetic in some ways, but in other ways does have that sort of profundity to it. But I guess kind of a nice further avenue is talking about Charlie a little bit more, because he is an interesting character here, in terms of what Nick was saying about his personality, his persona, I suppose, and how that sort of comes across. And friend of the pod, James Corral, speaks to this. We're not going to do this, but here's the question he asked, which was rank these bosses: Charlie Methven, Stuart Donald, Martin Bain, David Brent, and Jeff Lintonator Linton from The Train Guy. But instead of doing that, the question I'm going to ask is, are the David Brent stereotypes fair? Do we think that they're merited? What is our view of this guy? I mean, I'm sure it will change over the course of the series and we'll come back to it. But in terms of this guy, I mean, is it fair to kind of characterize him as that kind of person straight away?
So for me, the key with David Brent is that, you know, you're trying to be this pally, friendish, mentorish person, whilst at the same time you think that all of your staff find you funny, that they enjoy your company, that they want to be around you, that they respect you. But at the end of the day, they think you're just pretentious, arrogant, and mean. I don't think that Charlie Methven is under any illusions about maybe how he's coming across, but he's trying to kind of win respect by winning almost. If he was a football manager, that's what he was trying to do. You know, it's like, if we turn this ship around, then they'll come back on side. And so it's not the classic Brentism in that sense, that he certainly doesn't think they like him now, but he thinks he'll make them like him.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think the reason you make those comparisons is because of the way he's acting around the camera. And it'd be very interesting to see how he acted if that camera wasn't there, whether he'd have, you know, performed. Because it almost felt like a performance in front of the cameras. I'm going to make a point. I'm going to say to the guys, do you know the answer to this question? You should know the answer, because he knows the camera's watching him, or he's going to say, someone challenge me on this, you know, quite assertively. Like, I just can't see that an individual would act that way if the camera wasn't there. That was kind of my only kind of comparator between David Brent. But I think otherwise, I think it's probably quite an unfair comparison, because David Brent, you know, anyone who's watched The Office knows he's an idiot, and you know, tries to be pally and tries to be funny, and evidently fails epically. And that's not really what Charlie Methven's about. He's more about the business, and you can see that's his end goal. But you know, it did come across a little bit like a caricature, slightly, I think, partly because the camera was there.
Yeah, I mean, he says, I need everybody to see what good looks like. And then I think that kind of informs, as Nick says, the performance that he puts on. But in terms of the Brent stereotype, I just don't think that that's fair, actually. Like, I can see where that comes from for Charlie more than it did for Martin Bain, who I think just definitely was not a David Brent. I think David Brent exists and does so well because he's a stereotype. He's somebody that you can basically say has some similarities in his character to lots of people that you know. Bain felt a lot like a lot of directors that I've come across in my career and he particularly was just having a really hard time, and I felt genuinely sorry for him. And I felt that David Brent for Martin Bain felt like something that people reach for when they hadn't been exposed to somebody like this guy before, and kind of were just looking for a stereotype to kind of help them relate to this person. And a lot of people did reach for Brent. I didn't quite get that. With Methven, I definitely can see that a little bit better. But I guess in his defense, sometimes you do have to have a structure in place, and the language of business is often buzzwords. And you know, I know it doesn't sound particularly cool, but a lot of the time these phrases circle back, revert, I don't know, get our ducks in a row, like all of these sorts of things, they exist for a reason, because it gives everyone a frame of reference to talk on. And I just ask, is the FPL community that dissimilar? Like, I often get people picking on me if I use an unfamiliar word, which is part of an expanded vocabulary that people aren't used to. You know, for example, someone like Adam Hurrey, football cliches, his whole account is based on the fact that we all use a shared lexicon. And it's the same in business as well. People do use the same phrases, and they use them for a reason, so everybody knows what they're talking about, even though it does sometimes come across as pretty cringeworthy. Like, arrogant, yeah, I can see that. But equally, like, why do people see that as well? I don't think he actually pervades too much arrogance per se. He's not like nasty or anything. It's just stereotyping a little bit. Like, but I guess kind of to Nick's point, like, how else would you want him to act? Would you want him to be nervous? Like, everyone would be having to go at him saying he's a bit snivelling, you know, a little bit kind of cowardly. if he was like a schemer, everyone would be saying, oh, he's basically Peter Baelish. He's basically a devious guy. Like, it's very no-win for him, I kind of feel. But one thing he does need to do is ditch the pastel chinos as soon as possible, because they make him look like an absolute twat, don't they, really?
You see, I think he reminds me actually of Jurgen Klopp. If Jurgen Klopp took over your business, he'd kind of do the same thing. He'd speak in very kind of layman's terms, this business is effed, this team is effed. We need to change things, Let's say, remember what Klopp did when they drew with West Brom, where he brought the whole Liverpool team down to like serenade the away fans, lifting their arms up. This sort of like crazy, what looked at the time to be complete statements, but in the overall sense of actually did help bring that team around. And, within a few years, they were European champions. So I actually think that's the biggest comparison that I could think of off the top of my head. And it's only just because you're meeting this man for the first time, this is how you view him. But because someone like Klopp came from abroad where he'd already succeeded, you had a totally different view.
Yeah, I think all these little sort of things can be building blocks to a narrative. And as you say, like, if things hadn't worked out for Klopp, then all these things would be looked at as being utterly ridiculous, like some sort of weird thing that some strange foreign manager had done. Like, as soon as you said that about West Brom, I immediately thought of Phil Brown at Hull sitting the players on the pitch and doing half-time team talk, right? Like, if Hull had done really, really well that season, like, he'd have been lauded as being the guy who, inspired them to this through some unorthodox sort of tactics. And I think it's kind of that sort of how things become a narrative, I guess, is.
He even briefly got that credit before again being derided, did he not? Because did they not win a weekend later and Jimmy Bullard went out and sat them all around him and did it?
I think Jimmy Bullard was taking the piss.
But he was getting the credit still for, re-energizing them by maybe like being a bit self-effacing. And then
maybe it was short-lived, I think. I think it was just Jimmy being cheeky rather than Phil Brown being credited. Yeah, I mean, a week's a long time in football, of course, as we all fondly remember from our days of watching football. Yeah.
I think that's definitely a complimentary comparator there, though, to compare him with Jurgen Klopp. I think, maybe we'll go with that one as opposed to David Brent for now. But let's see if that changes later on in the season there, Stone.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of in tune with this kind of changing things up, making things happen. Like, you see the signings coming in, you see training kind of starting under Jack Ross. You see them changing the seats, so it comes up that the pink seats are really annoying the fans. The light in the stadium of light is too lighty, it's making them all go pink, so they're changing all the players. You see Mr. O'Nien, one of the footballers,
pronounced 9 like the number.
09.
Yeah, it's 09. Because I thought it was 09 at first, but no, it's 9 like the number.
Mr. 09.
I felt like Luke,
going in 2-footed. Sorry,
Luke 09. Who's half Asian like me, which I enjoyed. Helping
Irish as well.
Yeah,
probably. I don't know. For once, I actually don't know. I'll check.
He seemed a bit starstruck by Aidan McGeady and Brian Oviedo, didn't he? Which was a bit.
I actually, do you know what? Sorry to we'll focus in on Luke 09 for a second, because I wrote down in my own notes when I was watching it. Starstruck, because it just totally sums him up.
And then he had an absolute shocker of a first game as well.
A shocker of a first game, but also he had a shocker of a chair fitting session, because there was that fan who came up to him and they were talking about, maybe you should sign this chair because maybe when you become something, it'll be worth something.
What's your name? Sorry, what's your name?
Yeah,
Luke 09. Yeah.
No, it's Luke, and then no, what's your surname? Luke 09. Oh, right, yeah. And then maybe they'll say Luke 09 built this chair. And it was just like, oh, Luke.
This was the chair that was fixed by, what's your name? Luke. Luke what? 09. Right. That's what you could say.
In my notes, I just put Luke 09 fixing the chairs.
It just shows how down to earth they are, doesn't it?
I think the whole chair fitting though, I think that was quite another sort of clever brainwave from Stuart and Charlie though. It did feel like they're sort of trying to harness the power of the fans, getting the new signings involved, getting all the fans involved, and a quick way for some free labour as well, which was a very, very clever sort of policy to introduce in terms of they're trying to cut down the budget as much as possible.
Maybe something to just look at there. There was a bit of contrast though. So you've got this effort that the two directors are putting in to get the fans in. You could say for free labour if you wanted to, as you say, Nick, but they're trying to get the fans in to have a physical manifestation of like the change. But at the same time, you had this like physical manifestation again of the culture of the staff within the club. That Stuart walked past, if you remember the glue, there was a sign that had fallen off the outside of the building, and Stuart was complaining that, oh my God, like nobody has like had the joy in their work to go and fix this sign. It just looks so awful. I can't believe it. I just love that kind of like play between the two at the same time, that you're kind of seeing that both legs aren't necessarily traveling at the same speed at that club.
Oh yeah, exactly. And then that scene is juxtaposed with Charlie testing the new music and having a really cringeworthy exchange with the stadium announcer, and kind of walking around the stadium, hearing this sort of EDM Ibiza club music, and kind of throwing his hands up in the air, and you're kind of thinking, oh mate, come on. Like, he's one of those people who hasn't accepted his age, sort of thing, and probably still sees himself as being like how he was when he was 20.
He was a DJ.
Really?
He was a DJ. Yeah.
I thought he was just BSing that.
No, former DJ. And so I think that's part of it. But my favorite part of that exchange was, he asked him to turn it up, and the guy comes down through the radio, "You're the boss." He said, "Oh, well, I wouldn't say that." And it's just kind of, jeez.
Oh. Yeah, okay. I guess you can see from that sort of exchange that feels incredibly cheesy, Adam Pritchard level of cheese there. But you kind of look at it and you kind of think, okay, yeah. But yeah, no. So moving on, we go for injuries start to come in. The new striker Wyke has been injured, and a few other players have been injured, and they're kind of thinking, the big game, the first game of the season is against Charlton. They all sound very nervous the morning before.
How you feeling, all right?
I've never been this nervous for a game of football. Never.
I don't think I have.
Yeah, I mean, they do the games really, really well, I think, on Sunderland Til. Like, it's a real centerpiece. It takes about 15 minutes of this episode, actually, to go through that whole sort of gamut of what's going on, from them arriving to the game to the Spanish Ned asking, what are they singing, to the last gasp, Lyndon Gooch goal. Everyone loves a Gooch goal, don't they? But yeah, no, very, very cool indeed. What do you guys think about how they do the games in Sunderland Til? Because I think it is really cool.
Yeah, I really like it. I think it's very interesting to spend so much time on one particular game, and they did that quite a bit in the last series as well. Sort of these focal points, these focus points, and you get to see the board members as well at half time going to their private room, all kind of getting quite worked up, quite agitated, and you kind of see the fans as well. You didn't see as much of the fans this episode you have done previous series, but yeah, it's I do really like the way they focus in on the match. I had no idea what the score was going to be, to be honest. I don't know if you guys had any idea at all, but that kind of adds a bit of drama to the occasion as well. None of us can watch any real football at the moment, so yeah, I thought that was really effective.
What I thought was really effective about that whole pre-game part, actually, there was really nice cinematography around Sunderland, etc., showing the city getting ready. But what I really liked was that, okay, as Tom alluded to, we saw that the actual management group were super nervous before the game, and we saw Stuart Donald talking about his doubts that if their hard work wouldn't pay off and how would it go or whatever. But they weren't just worried within themselves and with each other. They were also nervous, like, outside to fans, to the owners group. Like, and they were trying to be as transparent they could about how they felt and the uncertainty of the occasion. And there's that moment where they pulled up beside another fan in a car and they spoke out the window to each other, and they were basically just explaining that they were super nervous, and the fan was kind of almost wondering, how could you be nervous? But I loved that moment of just like, okay, these guys are just doing their best to try and integrate and put their body on the line almost for the club.
Well, put their money on the line, I suppose, for the club, and put their professional pride on the line for the club, which seems to be an underlying sort of factor of this show. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, there's this fantastic last gasp diving header past the Charlton keeper by Lyndon Gooch, which settles the game. And then as we fade out, we have our man Charlie providing this sort of overlay. He kind of starts to talk about, as the fans all cheer deliriously, what they're trying to do.
Our job is to keep ourselves steady, even while around us emotions are swirling.
He kind of reminded me of the tree people in The Lord of the Rings, because he's talking about how, we need to be steady while people are emotional. We need to still the turmoil, and we need to harness the passion of the fans. He really reminded me of those tree people, that it's just like, no matter what, we will be slow and deliberate, and we will think about what we do and try to not just lose our minds. I kind of liked it. Again, okay, there's cliches, etc., but I still kind of liked the message he was trying to get across. It wasn't just like, I'm as delirious as the rest of you, let's get on the roller coaster and see where we go. Sunderland have had enough of that.
Like the Ents for you. For me, I was thinking Rudyard Kipling. If you can keep your head while those around you are losing theirs.
I thought he was going to finish the line because he had like half of a line and he didn't actually go for the rest of it. But yes, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, no. I said harness the passion of the fans, and if we get that right, the intensity and emotional support can be an unstoppable force. He says to end it on a horribly cringeworthy Brentism.
It definitely felt rehearsed, that line, didn't it? But as you said, he did. You could tell the vibe that he was going for in terms of what the message he's trying to portray, at least.
Yeah, patient and considered in the face of delirium, I think probably is about right. So that takes us to the end of episode 1. Did we like the episode, guys?
Yeah, I think it was a pretty solid introduction. Like, there was an awful lot of new things to take into account with this. Like, there was a new manager, a new squad, a new ownership group, new chairs, new music, an awful lot of things to kind of get acquainted with. And I thought they did a pretty good job of bringing us through that and into the first game of the season, which was, I guess, the perfect kind of Cinderella story for day one.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really like the episode as well. It's actually, in terms of the football documentaries that I have seen, it's certainly been the best one of the bunch. I've only seen the Salford one, Leeds one, and Manchester City one, but I feel like this is definitely sort of the best, and not just because of the sub story element to it, but just in terms of the cinematography and everything that goes with it.
Yeah, it's very good, I thought, as well. And 43 minutes. I think the next episode that we'll cover next week is only about half an hour. So, yeah, quite a long introduction, but introducing all those things, as Stag said. And key takeaways, I guess, from this episode as well. The first thing is to see whether Charlie can implement what he's talking about. So often you get loads of people at companies who are all fart, no poo. We'll talk a lot in conference calls, and we'll talk a lot in working group meetings about what they're going to do. And you find out 2 weeks later they've done absolutely nothing. So it'll be interesting to see whether Charlie does do that, and whether Stuart Donald's vision can be, Charlie's vision, I guess, through Stuart Donald can be realised. Any other key takeaways you think from this?
I loved when they were doing the repair of the seats scene. One of the fans that was there talked about the new owners being a godsend. And what I kind of liked is, immediately went through my head was, how long will that last, knowing what had happened to the previous ownership group?
Yeah. This is very interesting. I also noticed, obviously, with Josh Madger, who we haven't talked about in this episode. I remember last season, he was like the young upcoming, full of enthusiasm, excited to be at the club. And then I think the first scene when he's sort of in the changing room, he's late, and he's what was your excuse? Why are you late? He's just chilling at home. It felt like a lot of negative energy that we saw from some of the players at the beginning of the previous season. So it'll be very interesting to see how that develops, and his relationship with his new manager as well.
Yeah, some foreshadowing there, it may be said. I can see Stag brimming.
Like there's a particular moment there, actually, just as Jack Ross keeps walking out of the room, and Maja looks across to, forgive me, I don't remember which of the other players, and the two of them kind of make eye contact, and you kind of know that they're both like, those handshakes or whatever you want to call them, they were naff, weren't they? They're immediately, they've just written them off.
There was certainly a look between the two players.
Yeah, they left that in, didn't they? Just a tantalising moment that the camera lingered just that second too long, just to kind of show you that they wanted you to see that exchange between the players, the unspoken exchange, of course.
I think it contrasts quite well with George Honeymoon, who sort of like who came across the sort of best out of all the players in the first season, the player that wears sort of his heart on his sleeve and was given the captain's armband.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Cool. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll be back next week to talk episode 2. That will be kind of the way we do it. We'll kind of narrate, in some senses, our way through the episode and take some pit stops during it, just to talk through some key points. So, for example, tonight we're talking about the ownership issue, and also talking about Charlie and his sort of way of approaching things.
Thanks very much for listening, guys, and please do give us any feedback or any thoughts that you want. I think we kind of see this as like a great opportunity to kind of almost explore the world of football, with Sunderland Til almost as like the conduit that kind of just brings us along the way. And I think there's an awful lot of really interesting themes. I think I'm the only one here who's watched the whole series straight through already, and there's an awful lot to consider and unpack, to use another one of those directorisms as we go through this. And it's actually a brilliant series. So.
Yeah, I'm certainly looking forward to watching the rest of it, and I think I'll probably be doing episode by episode as we pod, just so my opinions aren't too biased, even though I do know what happens with Sunderland at the end of this particular season. But yeah, that was fun to do anyway, and just to say who we are Who Got the Assist? Twitter at WGTA_FPL, at WGTA_Nick, at FPL Stag, and we're on Instagram, WGTA Spot FPL.
We'll be back next week to talk about episode 2, the old-fashioned way. Well, I'm not going to assist you with anything again, but stay safe, and we'll speak to you very, very soon. Cheers.
Slán.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?